Hello, boils and ghouls. Welcome to a very special interview episode of Dads from the Crypt. My name is Jason, and today I'm joined by acclaimed film writer and author Ian Nathan, whose latest deep dive, Aliens Expanded, takes fans inside the making of James Cameron's action horror masterpiece like never before. From the evolution of Ellen Ripley into an all-time action icon, to the groundbreaking special effects that brought the Xenomorphs and the Queen to life. Ian uncovers the stories behind the chaos, creativity, and sheer ambition that define this legendary production. So grab your pulse rifle, keep your motion tracker close, and join us as we go bug hunting with Ian Nathan. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Very good introduction indeed.
Thank you. I'm a huge Aliens fan. We just we did a review with our friend Rachel. It was also, one of her favorite movies, and we got to have my son on the episode. So it was a very fun discussion, and I'd seen Alien so many times that I decided I wanted to watch the special features. So I started Googling around to find the ones from the DVDs, and then I came upon Aliens Expanded. I'm like, what's this new 4 hour plus?
Indeed, 4 hours 17 minutes,
which gets me excited anytime a documentary is longer than the movie itself. And I was like, how we've already, for so much that's been documented and written and everything about aliens, how are they going to have more to discuss? And you pulled it off. So hats off to you.
Thank you. It's an interesting, that's the biggest dilemma. What you just mentioned is like when you go into making a documentary about a beloved film, the first thing that occurs to you and keeps occurring to you throughout the production is, does everybody know this? Is this, familiar to everybody? Is this stuff I'm just rehashing? And you kind of have to make your peace with it a little bit. As much as you are in search of fresh stories, Aliens Expanded isn't the untold story of aliens. Mm-hmm. It's aliens seen through the prism of now, and it's seen through the prism of, why do we all love it so much? 40 years later, why do we love it so much? And I think as long as I kept that in my head, everything seemed to make sense in terms of questions I asked, the people I interviewed, and the structure of the documentary. I would say it's a love story that I've made for between me and aliens.
Right. Again, I was blown away. There are still stories and facts that, you have to cover, the overall stuff, but there were still nuggets that were laying there. That was really impressive to me. And the enthusiasm that everyone was talking about it with is probably more so than I've seen any other feature, which is really impressive.
Yeah, I think, what I've learned when you do documentaries is it is really performative. So it's about half about what they're saying and half about how they're saying it. So, I like to think of the film as the documentary as a sense of you sort of hanging out with these people. It's a long, indulgent and deliberately so exploration of one of my favorite films and one of a lot of people's favorite films. But it's a chance just to hang out with Cameron and Sigourney Weaver and Gail Ann Hurd and Michael Biehn and just listen to them, and just enjoy their company as much as it is, hey, what happened back then and how did it work and why did it work? It's also just about, it's nice just to talk, and just to hang out with your favorite film.
I mean, you have like extensive, career already in journalism, and I'm assuming you've interviewed many people over the years. But like, do you still fanboy for at least a moment when you into the room and Sigourney's just sitting there?
When we got Cameron, we got confirmed, and I flew out to LA, and it was a light storm in LA. Everything goes through your head. I mean, Cameron, as is well known, does not suffer fools gladly. Yeah, he is an extraordinary man, but has a sort of an extraordinary personality. So I was naturally nervous, rehearsed, knew my questions. And I know the films, I know Aliens. So I was confident that I wouldn't let myself down in the sense of knowledge. But it was still James Cameron. And one of the greatest things in the whole of the journey of making Aliens Expanded was how warm he was and how funny and how at ease. And he came in and just started telling his stories. And he was an older, wiser guy, recalling his younger self. And I just felt this kind of elation when I thought, yeah, this is going to be really cool, just hanging out with him. This isn't going to be me sort of biting my nails. But of course, you have to be ready for that. And I think he did respect the fact that the documentary and myself, weren't treating it lightly. We were treating it seriously. And one thing I think is true, and I think he liked, was that I don't think he gets enough respect as a filmmaker. We talk a lot about his franchises and how much the films mean to us, of course, and how successful they are. But we never talk about him as an equivalent of Scorsese or Steven Spielberg. We have to, and when you watch the films, you go, oh, he's an extraordinary filmmaker. His choices and his use of the camera and his visual kind of style, and of course his screenwriting. And that was really important to me to bring that out, that this is about a legacy of someone who has changed popular culture. So it was a big deal. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, he's always seemed that I almost get mad that someone is as talented as he is, from like a design perspective. Like he just is an amazing artist, just drawing stuff and his imagination. And then, you put that together with his filmmaking abilities and his ingenuity. Sure. It's like, it's almost not fair for one person to be that good at that many things.
And when you hear him talk, you realize that he is one of nature's storytellers. So he can just, whatever you throw at him as a question, he'll turn it into an anecdote and a story, because that's his setting. Mm-hmm. I asked him once we were quite relaxed and having fun. I thought I'll ask him famously about the tea lady, this kind of legend. And I've sort of heard bits of it, but I thought I want to get this on the record. What is the true story of the tea lady? And I said, I'm going to ask it. I'm saying, what did happen with the tea lady? And he smiled, went, okay, you want the tea lady story? And he just gave it to me in this kind of wonderful verbatim kind of soup to nuts, the story of the tea lady. And I just put it in the doc wholesale. I think I cut a little bit off the start and the end, and just put it in because it worked so perfectly as a one unit and one story. I thought, there it is. You
got me. It was making me thinking, like, if someone was going to make like a dramatized version of the making of Aliens, I would write it from the tea lady's perspective.
I know.
Like, coming to and from the set every day and just seeing like all this
kind of old lady pushes a trolley and just
like in the background these like amazing scenes are being filmed, but you're seeing it from like her, like, what the hell is that?
4 o'clock though, here she comes with a big urn and a sticky buns. And and it was such a British thing. It really encapsulated the kind of culture clash of Cameron with his kind of Terminator head style guerrilla, get the film made head on, with these kind of old-fashioned British film-making crew who just like their mandated tea break at 4 o'clock. It really encapsulated maybe the tensions that were there with the making of Aliens. And I love that. One story can tell you a lot more than just the witty story of the tea lady.
But without the talent of Pinewood and all the people that were working there, like Aliens wouldn't be what it is. It's
completely.
Like the economy of it.
And and Cameron talks a lot about that and Scorney talks a lot about the fact that these guys had worked on Alien, they were absolutely devoted to Ridley. I think they've made Ridley films like subsequently, and so they were a bit like, and Cameron had made one film and they hadn't seen it. He kept trying to show them Terminator, and they're all like, "I'm going home, Gov. Don't worry about it." And he said it was the point where it arrived on VHS, and they sort of got hold of it. Because he can almost remember the next day, and they came in and they're all like, that was really good. And they started to realize he knew what he was doing, because he was essentially one film down, when he came to make it. It wasn't like he's the Cameron we now know, right? Kind of godhead in cinema. He was a guy who sort of come from America, and it wasn't Ridley Scott, it wasn't Ridley coming back. And so it was a complicated situation where you had to kind of win them over. But it worked eventually. But it was a journey, as they say.
Now let's take a step back for a minute. What do you remember about your first time watching Aliens?
Right. I was 16, and this was the pre-internet era. So it must be my knowledge of a sequel to Alien would have been based on trailers at the cinema, seeing other stuff. I wouldn't have had any other inkling that the sequel was coming, and there was no sense beyond Star Wars and Star Trek maybe there was no expectation of sequels. It wasn't like me as a film fan thought, well, everything's naturally going to get a sequel, because it wasn't like that. Certainly back in the early 80s. So I must have seen trailers, and I was a huge fan of Alien, which I'd seen on VHS. And my dad took me. It was a cinema in London, the Odeon, Fulham Palace Road. I remember exactly which one. And things get a bit confused, because I think it was sort of like an afternoon or an early afternoon screening, but I remember it being full. I'm trying to think, would it have been full? That's a bit confused in my head, but it was full, apparently, in my memory. And of course, it was extraordinary. It did so much more than I expected it to do. Everyone knows how gripping Aliens is, but there's nothing like the first time. Mm-hmm. And you have to kind of remind yourself to breathe. But my absolute searing memory of it is the bit where Burke shuts the door on Newton Ripley as they're trying to make their escape. And this guy, like, I don't know, so many rows behind me, an older guy. And in my head, I think he stands up, but he may not have done. But he just shouted out, "You bastard, you bastard." And I thought, that's how he'd forgotten he was watching a film. He was so gripped that his emotions had got the better of him. And I thought, that is filmmaking. That is the point where he's completely divorced from reality, and the emotions of the film have taken over. And in fact, Galen Hurd in The Dark tells a similar story. Like on the night it opened, that she and Jim drove around cinemas and sort of popped in to watch. And she remembers seeing a couple, and the girl had pulled off the armrest of the seat and was so terrified she's banging her boyfriend with this armrest, because that's the kind of film it was and remains. It's so gripping that you do forget you're watching a film. You're so immersed, and your emotions and your adrenaline is so kicked in that it divorces you from reality. It's incredible.
So, fast forwarding, what drew you specifically to revisit Aliens in this expanded form?
Well, I'd taken a meeting with my executive producer and who runs his company, Creative VC, and invited me in to talk about making documentaries, because I'd come, as you said, from a film writer background and written books, but I never made a documentary before. And he talked about, he had this idea for this format called Expanded, in which you take the completed film, so Aliens as we now know and love it, you break it down into sequences, 20 sequences I chose, that sort of take you chronologically through the film. So from the initial salvage moment right through to the confrontation with the Queen, so the whole film. And each segment would, you would explore thematically, making of, appreciation and analysis, and even taking sort of tangents into metaphorical readings. Is it a Vietnam film? Anything you can draw from it that might draw you back to the idea of why we love it. So he said, this is the structure he imagined. I was a bit mind boggled. And he went, which film within the kind of sci-fi horror bandwidth do you think would work? And I went, without hesitation, I went, Aliens. And yeah, I agree. And the interesting question was, why didn't I pick Alien? Because it's the origin of that franchise, and it's a film I remain in complete awe of. And what it was, and what we both agreed on what it was about the fans' love of it. And I don't mean to say fans don't love Alien. They do, of course, but there's some kind of very particular relationship, sort of, I don't think, technically they call it a parasocial relationship, between fans of Aliens and the content of Aliens, the characters of Aliens. Those Marines are friends to people. They are, people, they've accompanied people on their lives. Ripley's redemptive arc is extraordinarily important to people. And the power of the film itself, how gripping, we've just talked about how gripping it is. All those things seem to translate to a layer that we could bring to the documentary, because in a sense, the expanded format, and we've done the thing since, that's why I say it's a format, but the expanded format is also about fandom. It's about what's grown in subsequent years around films. And in a very serious way, I say fandom, because I think fandom is an enormously powerful thing, an enormously powerful expression of things that are important to people's lives. Nostalgia can be seen as a dirty word, and I think is actually a vital part of who we are and our identity. And especially in this kind of world where culture is getting fragmented and it's very hard to get a fix on what's important anymore, we cling to these things. In music, they say it's the soundtrack of your life, don't they? It's the albums you grew up with. I think I grew up with Aliens. It's not just a film I watched. It's a film that sort of accompanied me. And that felt like something I personally wanted to explore with the film. Why do I keep going back to it? Why do I need it around me? So all those things sort of went into it and said, well, Aliens just fits. We got this idea for a format, and this is the film, I think, which will bring it to life.
Wow. What were the biggest revelations, things that you stumbled upon?
Revelations, again, it's a hard thing. I said at the beginning that you worry that when a film is so beloved and people know everything, and online culture is such that the film has been pulled apart and explored in its extraordinary ways. I'm in awe of what I call the hive mind of Aliens fandom, and I'm trying to draw from it to help me. I mean, there was a lot more of stuff I didn't know about Cameron's relationship with Guyler and Hill at the beginning, where he was in terms of the project itself. That a lot of revelation to me on that basis. I didn't realize how hard it was to get Weaver back.
Oh, really?
Not that she was playing hard to get necessarily, although her agent may have been. It was just that, again, it wasn't an era where sequels were necessarily a natural thing. So she'd just been getting on with her life, and her career. She wasn't thinking, when will they call? And out of the blue, this script got sent to her that Cameron had written, and she had no idea, And Cameron talked very amusingly about when she came in to meet him for the first time, and he was quite terrified. It was Ripley, and he felt that Ripley was vital, in his concept of where you could take the alien story in a sequel. He understood that it's a saga about Ripley. The alien is also the MacGuffin. Ripley is the saga. The film really should be called Ripley. It shouldn't be called Alien because it's her story. And he understood that because he's a genius, but he had no idea where she was coming from, what she'd be like. So he was a little bit in awe, and they met in Santa Barbara, I think. And she had this kind of his copy of the script which had been sent to her, and she had all these kind of post-it notes and notes. She'd gone through it with that because that's how she works. She's very analytical, and she'd gone through this script and highlighted things. And he was a bit, oh no, what? Of course, famously, she had a lot of desires that he held firm that he wouldn't give her. She wanted no guns. She had the idea of Ripley dying. She wanted kind of a much more kind of ambiguous relationship between Ripley and the creature. She wanted it to be stranger, I think, than Cameron had planned. And a lot of those things actually come out in Alien 3. They're kind of re sort of invented for Alien 3. And Cameron, because he is who he is, he sort of said, I'm not going to give you any of those things. This is the story. Lots of guns and and she believes in disarmament. She's not someone who wants to advocate gun, usage. So there was an interesting tension between her relationship with his portrayal of her character, and he got her there. And I think that was very new to me. That was very revelatory. I had no idea. I mean, Lance Henriksen, who's a joy just to listen to his voice, telling stories about how he arrived in British Customs with a case full of knives. Because he was going to do the knife thing, and they planned this kind of knife trick. And naturally, he brought Jim a selection of knives. And of course, British Customs opened up his case, and his knives on display. And Gail Ann heard her to go to the airport with some people she knew who kind of got in through British Customs. So, real kind of texture around the production, and the nature of the production, as much as things in the world. One thing that the fans and the backers sort of said to me in various kind of discussions was that they wanted to know about the lives of the Marines. Who were they off the screen? Who were they before Aliens? And it was really interesting to talk to each of them about an idea of the character. Jeanette Goldstein with Vasquez, that she'd come through gangs, she'd been in prison, that army was the only way out of that she knew what it was to kill, and she'd formed this platonic bond with Drake that was vital because they'd both come out of prison. So she brought this whole sort of sense of her own knowledge of LA and a certain kind of contemporary feeling. And that's one thing I really like about Aliens is while it's far-fetched and it's futuristic, it's contemporary in a way. It feels the look of the Marines and the feel of the Marines feels very now, certainly the now of 1986.
Well, yeah.
And sort of a little bit also the now of Vietnam. And because obviously Cameron had been working on Rambo 2 and been reading Michael Hare's dispatches and had all the kind of the Vietnam vernacular in his head as he wrote it. So there's a kind of bleeding of things into it that kind of make it what it is.
Well, yeah. Apart from the little anecdotes that I never heard before, which I really enjoyed, like the Lance Henriksen knife thing and all that, the from the production, because there's been a lot written about the on the production level. The idea, what came out to me in the documentary is the idea that it's sci-fi and it's set hundreds of years in the future, but there's all these clues grounding you to the familiar. They're still using the yellow and red stripes.
The kind of emergency, do not go beyond. Yeah. And you never think about that, do you? But it triggers your brain. Yeah.
Yeah. Or like the way Burke is dressed is like only slightly featured. He's not like wearing like, a vinyl suit and like a see-through tie, like Back to the Future 2 or
and
something.
The Filofax thing was great, wasn't it? Because he mentioned, Paul Reiser said he chose a Filofax as part of his costume because 1986, Filofax is a very big thing. And Cameron warns him, you're going to regret that because you're going to be carrying it for the whole movie. And me and my editor were crawling through scenes going, does he have a Filofax? And we found it. There's about a couple of scenes where he is going in with his Filofax. You just see him walk through a scene.
Right.
I think he dispensed with it pretty quickly because it was a burden to carry that thing. But
well, yeah, also once you enter like life and death situation, you're like, fuck the Filofax.
Yeah. Make some notes about the alien,
what were your biggest challenges in making this documentary?
The number one challenge is convincing talent to be involved. That's and it's a long-winded process. It's axiomatic that the bigger the name, the longer it takes to get them to agree and get a time in their kind of schedule. And obviously, Cameron was in the middle of Avatars, and he's a very, very busy man at all times. Sigourney, he's been shooting numerous films. So that was our biggest challenge in sort of just logistical terms.
As someone who, also, asks people for interviews, for the podcast and stuff, it takes like, a couple dozen no's just to get a yes. And that just kind of like,
And you have to hang on in there because you get a no. Reiser said no to us about 3 times. And then I think once Cameron had done his interview, it sort of changed the landscape a little bit, and then he came on board. I understand that people don't necessarily know where you're coming from or how serious you're being. You have to try and convince them, and that's a journey, and a struggle. It was, managing the whole volume of material because obviously the structure of Expanded is to take scenes and sequences and explore what's in them. So inevitably, your piece on that scene is going to be at least twice as long as that scene. So you take the hive sequence, you go through it almost beat by beat, you're going to be twice as long, not 3 times as long as the hive sequence. So sort of keeping control of the storytelling was quite a challenge. And really interesting things that you don't think about when you try this structure and you're doing numerous different things within one sequence. You're looking at music and theme, all the kind of things we've been talking about, character and performance and making of. It's really complex to change subject. It's really hard to go from, okay, here's a bit on Burke and his costume, to go on to a bit on, well, here's, the Marines being introduced on the ship and the casting of each of the Marines, and what was going on in London. You don't want whiplash. You don't want your kind of viewer to go, what? Hold on, why are we talking? So that it became a real kind of challenge to introduce kind of almost subliminal pauses and music changes and use of clips that, because I've got no voiceover. Voiceover, someone go, right, okay, now let's talk about this. Yeah. So it gets you through that. So I had to do it by sort of subtle means. Sometimes you get an interviewee, you can just introduce a subject beautifully. Yeah, let me tell you about the tea lady. It just begins. Sometimes you do it with graphics. Sometimes you do it with music. But that was very hard. And I think there were early versions of the film, the assembly, which was about sort of 6 hours long, where it was quite confusing. And me and Matt had to really work to kind of just bring coherence to each segment and make sure each segment had value, that when you talked about it being a Vietnam film, that was really analyzed and brought to life, that it wasn't just a throwaway quote. It was 5 people on that and what they could, what they thought. Bean didn't think it was much of a Vietnam film, which was interesting. Obviously Cameron did. Differing opinions are great as long as you sort of have a kind of tapestry, a texture to put them in.
Having watched the movie, and torn it apart and rearranged it and edited it over and over and over again, can you still watch Aliens the same way?
I haven't since. It's a funny one. And it sort of comes with it. I'm sure you feel this a little bit. It comes with the territory of being a film writer and a film documentary maker, that I just can't watch any film without starting to put 2 pieces together in my head, or to start to ask it questions, to look at what's going on. It's just an instinct now. It's really hard just to go with the flow of a story. And I think
when I was in high school, I took a film appreciation class, which, everybody, of course, wants to sit there and watch film in high school. That's like, but it taught me very early to be an active film watcher.
Yeah.
And what to be thinking about as you're watching a film. And that's, for better or for worse, changed how I watch film. Because I can't just sit and enjoy.
Absolutely. There are
things on certain levels.
Yeah. But once you've really pulled it apart and almost what's going on just behind the camera at that moment in time and what they were thinking and feeling, it's very hard to sort of regain the film as a film. So I haven't tried. I knew I had to leave it for a while. Yeah, I knew I had to sort of let it be out of my head for a long time. I wrote a book about the making of the Lord of the Rings films in huge amounts of detail. I spent a long time in New Zealand with those films and very passionate about them. And I remember talking to Philippa Boyens, the screenwriter of the, he's a brilliant. And I said, can you read the book? And she went, no. The book's gone. I've lost it. Yeah. I loved it. It was, my book growing up. But I can't stop making a film out of it. When I open it up, I start making a film out of it again. And she's accepted that. She'll never quite get the book. She'll read the book, of course, but she'll never get it back to quite the way it was. I don't know if it'll be quite that dramatic for me, but I must try and watch Aliens again. One Friday night, get a beer, sit down and just go, right, I'm just going to watch Aliens again. I'm sure it will grip me again, but I might start thinking about, I should have talked about that,
Yeah. Maybe what I would recommend is finding someone who's never seen it before and watching it with them. You can kind of re-experience. Because I went to go see it on April 26th, a couple of years ago. And they had a screening, and Carrie Henn and Jack Goldstein were, there. Cool. And whenever I go to one of those, I always try to figure out, you can find pretty quickly who hasn't seen the film before. Yeah. So I know when the big scares are going to happen, I know who to watch and watch them jump out of their seats and just kind of experience vicariously.
Yeah.
Through those people. Just to go on a hopefully quick Lord of the Rings tangent. Now that they've announced they're doing something new.
Yeah. Column. Yeah.
Well, I heard that they're doing a post Lord of the Rings that Stephen.
Yeah, there's another project in development, isn't there? There's the journey, isn't it? It's something like the first 4 chapters of the book, but recalibrated to be after the events of Lord of the Rings, rather than a prequel. Anyway, it's an intriguing idea.
Yeah.
I'm a huge fan of what they achieved with those 3 original films. That to me was an impossible task, and they achieved it in ways I could never have imagined. I'm sure all of us experienced the moment when you watched the first one and you thought, this is what was in my head. This is the mind. These are the minds of Moria. This is the Shire. And you just had that electric feeling of what did you go into my head, Peter Jackson? Get out. So I dearly love those films, and they're very precious to me because I spent, no pun intended, but they're very precious to me because I spent time in New Zealand. I got to know Peter, and it was just some of the best times of my life. They were so lovely. The people, the Kiwi spirit is so honest, and they took such joy in what they were doing. You could see the pleasure and the work they were putting in. So those films mean an enormous amount to me. That I'm a little wary of going back.
Yeah.
Because, and they'll know this because they're super smart people, that you're going back a little bit without Tolkien by your side. You're taking a bit of Tolkien with you, but they're things that Tolkien only sort of mapped out in vague terms. They're not the stories that he wrote. And I part of me is a little bit like, what would this mean? But other parts of me are like, Andy's back, Ian McKellen's back in the hat, and Philip is a brilliant screenwriter. So I will watch it.
I want it, but I'm a little, after The Hobbit, I feel a little, not burned, but that was such a letdown. So, I mean, obviously I want that team to keep doing, but I'm very skeptical after the last go around.
I know. They've had time. I think there were a lot of factors with The Hobbit. It was going to be Guillermo and the rights issues, and Warner Brothers were going to pull the plug, literally. I think Jackson felt he had to keep everybody in a job. He had literally thousands of people to look after. And I don't know, and I wouldn't want to speak for him. I'm not sure 100% he wanted to make The Hobbit.
Yeah.
Not as director. I think he writer and producer, certainly. But I think he felt, as you would, that he'd done his Tolkien, he'd done his Middle Earth, but I think he took it as an obligation, as a responsibility, and he went back in very late in the process and had to do a lot of quick fixes, and maybe didn't resolve everything he needed to resolve.
Yeah, so I'm hoping that whatever the new thing is, that it redeems, it kind of brings us back.
Yeah, and they've had time, and they're going into this in a very different sort of way. They've spent a long time sort of behind it and figuring it out. So I think it'll be different from certainly The Hobbit. And also we have the advantage of, with The Hobbit, we brought an expectation to it. We knew The Hobbit, whereas we don't really know this story. So we don't have the same visualization. We don't quite have what is it? I'm not 100% sure what this story is. I know the outline, but that's also a good thing, I think. It's a bit like, well, okay, maybe I should just not think about this until I go and see it. Let it be what it is.
I mean, I'm obviously I'm going to go, but just the expectation game.
Yeah.
Okay. Now that we can go there and back again, let's talk about more aliens.
Yeah.
Was there anyone on your wish list that just you couldn't get for whatever reason?
And there were two I wanted to. One was Walter Hill, who was a flat no, and he doesn't talk about Alien and aliens very much. It's funny, if you look, I did a lot of research and I looked at old Walter Hill interviews. Really doesn't engage with it. He talks about all these other films, but he doesn't, particularly want to be the voice on those films. But I think he's an important constituent part, and he was the key producer. David Geiler had already died before we went into production. So he was one I would love to have got the background on and his feelings about the film. The other one was, at the time, was Neil Blomkamp, who had on his pitch for a new version of Alien 3, a new sort of timeline, which led directly from Aliens and carried on with, I'm sure Newton, Hicks, and Ripley. And I would just want to know more about that. But I think Blomkamp had just got a bit sick of always being asked, about a project that never happened. And understandably didn't want to just be asked about that. And so I understood that. There were some, there were some things, there are economics come into play. You've only got so much budget and so much time. So you have to measure who you're pursuing versus your budget. And, I wanted to talk to the cocooned woman, her chest, but you should only be in one section of the doc, one little bit talking about that sequence, which would have been lovely, but maybe economically I couldn't quite validate with my producers. So, there were things like that. But,
the whole Neil Blomkamp thing makes me, I get not angry, but I'm like, oh, if only we could have gone, it was
Yeah.
the perfect time and everything, but I think Ridley Scott was just, trying to do his thing and it just,
Yeah.
collapsed. But it's
And
one of those great what ifs. We could have gotten that.
it's a very strange franchise if you just look at it overall. After Aliens, which effectively invents the franchise, the second one, it doesn't, it's full of ambition. What you can never accuse the Aliens franchise of is not thinking, it's not caring. The problem is too much thinking. It's these torturous journeys of these projects that get overthought, and they go for directors who reject it and or try it and then abandon it. And I think the whole way along, it's just had this rather sort of schizophrenic weirdness. It's like, why have we done Alien Romulus and Alien Earth sort of at the same time?
Mm-hmm.
How do they fit together, or do they fit together? How does it all kind of work? And it's Alien versus Predator. Then Scott does prequels that sort of set up an answer maybe we didn't want, and it's an odd franchise. The one that makes complete sense is Aliens. It's the one that absolutely nailed on, total sense.
I mean, it's kind of one of those things that I think I love watching Dan O'Bannon interviews. He's such a wonderful kook, and he was talking about how, the title Alien is both a noun and an adjective. So I think that really sums up the whole series. It's meant to be weird. It's meant to be
and the idea of the other, is it subject that we are humans, and how do we contemplate the other? And there's a sense you could argue, if you're going to get sort of noodly about things, that Ripley is the alien of the story. Certainly in number 3, she's an alien, because one woman in this kind of prison full of terrible men. So it uses that word well. I mean, O'Bannon's fascinating. He had a very difficult life, kind of rather dark individual, and felt alienated his whole life, I think, from the industry, from just friendships. He's a guy who struggled, had a lot of pain himself physically. So you start to read about him and you think, God, there's so much of just his person that's gone into these films, certainly the first one, that it's sort of an expression of your own angst and pain has gone into Alien.
Which I think, the sci-fi community, a lot of the fandom relate to a lot of those feelings of alienation.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think
and also, he's also extraordinary knowledge of the genre. He had knowledge vastly beyond anyone else involved in Alien. From Scott, Walter Hill, David Giler, Cameron. O'Bannon knew the genre. Had read it all, had watched it all. He brought all that incredible sort of sense of the history of science fiction and condensed it and twisted it and put it into Alien, contained it. Everyone goes, I think it's a bit like this film, it's a bit like that film. Yeah, completely. O'Bannon knew all that. He was drawing from it all and getting it in. So I think absolutely he's a pivotal figure in genre.
One other aspect that I really liked about Aliens Expanded was how you kind of went off on those tangents about expanding universe with the comic books and the video game, which again, as I was a kid growing up in the late 80s, early 90s, I was always reading the Dark Horse comics and playing whatever game. And I even went onto eBay a year ago and bought up a bunch of the old Alien Dark Horse comics. And I still have my Alien 3 Dark Horse comic. And I really like that the film went into those little corners of fandom and the novelizations as well.
Yeah, we had more of it, which we eventually sort of cut back a bit, because it's only so much patience people can have with you.
No, there isn't.
It was really interesting. It was, I've just done The Thing Expanded, and The Thing is very self-contained, apart from one prequel and some comic books, but there's one game, there's very little expanded universe. Whereas Aliens, there is this kind of extrapolating worlds. And I loved sort of not just discovering what was in those stories, also the rules of the game. It was like Mark Verheiden, who we interview in it, who wrote the original Dark Horse comic books. We're talking about he'd signed up and they go, we can't put Ripley in because we haven't got the rights to Sigourney Weaver. and the character Ripley. So it's got to write around Ripley. So all these kind of restrictions that he had to figure out. And then obviously three series in, suddenly, you can do Ripley again now. So he has to sort of conceptualize, okay, I've got to bring her back somehow. And so, yeah, it wasn't as simple as, just dream up another story involving the characters. He had to kind of legally kind of chart a course. But it's a big world now. It's a funny one. Again, it's a strange franchise. I remember I spoke to Noah Hawley last year about Alien Earth. And he was saying one of the joys of going into that universe was that there's surprisingly little mythology. It's not like when you do Marvel or even Star Wars, where it just is exponential what the mythology is. With Alien, he said it's surprisingly small amounts of it within certainly the films. So it's really been something. It's got this great sense of mystery about it.
Right.
It's a haunted franchise.
Yeah, which is a plus and the minus, because the mystery leaves the fans, wondering, and kind of makes it scarier. You don't want to over-explain things. So
yeah,
my headcanon is that everything except for the movies, especially the first two, is just like what if stories.
Yes,
I don't think any of them as like a source of truth. I just
the
engineers, the alien, all that other stuff. I'm like, okay, it's kind of out there. It's kind of like, what if this was this? I don't take any of it as, I want it to be more unknowable.
I do, and I struggle with the prequels a little bit because I don't want to know who the space jockey was. I don't want to know where the derelict came from. Of course, part of me does, but my imagination's been doing that for years.
Yeah,
the power of those images that came from Giga was all about, my God, the universe is full of things we can never understand and never know, and ancient things. They just give off this vibe of. How long has it been on the planet? On one hand, he's been ossified. On the other hand, there's these eggs that are sitting there alive. So who knows? I just, to see the prequels to an extent sort of answer questions I hadn't asked. And that's always a tricky domain. The mystery is powerful.
All right, a couple quick questions before we wrap up. How do you celebrate Alien Day? When it's April 26th, what do you do?
Well, as we sort of spoke earlier, maybe it's the day I should watch Aliens again. I have been working on, I've sort of been doing a book proposal around the first film. So there's a bit of Alien in my head at the moment as well. So maybe I might do a double bill, but it's so difficult because I know them too well. And I watched Alien 3 again only a week ago, the assembly cut, because it sort of came up in a lot of online conversations. And it's a film I admire rather than love, but it's a really interesting film.
I'm an apologist for Alien 3. I mean, it's a bit of a mess, but it's an intriguing mess.
Absolutely. It's one of those films where it kind of like the biggest problem with Alien 3 is the alien. It's the least interesting part of the film. It's the creature itself. Visually, they never quite get it to work. I like the POV shots, but the actual creature running looks kind of weird. And it's almost like the alien spoils it. It's much more interesting just to be this kind of penal colony where this woman's arrived and how they deal with it. But almost that kind of Dickensian workhouse vibe going on. It's just visually, I think it's just extraordinary. Certainly the first half of the film. Really Fincher on his game, but you're right. Narratively, it's a bit of a mess.
I mean, anytime to see Charles dance, just doing this thing,
absolutely, And Charles Dutton, how great is Charles Dutton?
There's lots of
those kind of prayer sequences, right? Lord, and they're all bound. There's really good things about it. Clearly made by a great filmmaker, but obviously under very difficult circumstances.
Before you did the Aliens Expanded project, before it kind of got a little broken for you, did you prefer the theatrical or the director's cut?
With Aliens, I'm a big advocate of the theatrical. It's not that I don't enjoy the elements that were added, I do, but for me, the story is told through the eyes of Ripley and the Marines, not knowing what happened at Hadley's Hope. And the audience need to be there. I love that sort of sense of aftermath where you don't quite know who was there and what happened. It kind of replays some of the things in Alien. It's almost like the derelict. It's like they've arrived and seen this kind of haunted aftermath of something. It's got that atmosphere. And so I think it's the Mystery Planet version is better. I don't need Newt's parents. I don't need that little bit of narrative. It's better to imagine Newt's life and learn about it through her rather than be shown it. And the sentry guns, they're great. We all love a sentry gun. So that's probably the bit I like best in terms of coming back in. But I do believe, for me, firmly that the theatrical cut is the prime version of Aliens.
It's funny you mentioned the sentry guns, because the first time I saw it was on TV.
Right.
And I distinctly remember the sentry guns. I can't remember if the Ripley's daughter bit was in the cut I saw on the theatrical. But then I saw it, a little bit later, and the guns weren't there, and I was like, did I imagine that? I was doubting my
dreaming up
my Mandela effect. Like, were there more guns in this movie than there really were?
And it's sort of like backstory. I don't need to know her first name. She's Ripley. It just too much size. It's a bit like the prequels. It's like you don't need. The great Howard Hawks thing was that you understand the film in the moment. You understand it by the action of the film. Backstory is a waste of time. You learn the characters as they go. And Cameron's so good at that. We learned who those Marines were within beats. You've got who Hudson is. You've got who Vasquez is within sort of seconds almost. So you don't need to tell Ripley's story. I just didn't need it.
Right.
So, theatrical.
There we go. All right. And then our last traditional question: what advice do you like to give people who are interested in getting into writing and documentary making?
It's a very different world now to the one where I began, as you can see from my gray hair, and I've been doing it for a while. So I always feel a bit concerned. I do lectures and sometimes with students and things, and we do talk about, what are the opportunities. I think, on a kind of personal level, I think it's a great time to analyze film and curate your own story around film. These podcasts didn't exist when I started, and they're a great avenue, and they can be a very successful avenue. If I was to give advice on building a career in the media, generally, I would say, treat it. And I don't mean that I don't love what I do and very passionate about what I do. I am, but treat it pragmatically. Treat it with an understanding that it's a job. When I was on Empire magazine, which I was for many years, people say, how do I get into Empire? I said, the people who got into Empire understood what Empire did. They understood that it tried to sell magazines every month. So if you go to them, what are you giving to them? What are you bringing to them to do that? Not what are they giving to you? And would you pay for what you're bringing? So I say, like, this pitch you're making, would you give money for that if you were a customer? It's just a way of thinking about what helps a team out and what would make their life better. It was really hard to put a magazine together, and people who came to us with a kind of like ideas that's made our life easier, we like these people and brought them in. And so just think in sort of practical terms. Think about what the needs at the other end are, because people who make documentaries, people who make magazines and run websites and all these things, ultimately they're businesses. And they need to make money and to survive and to do what they do. And you want to make money. So think about that. Think about, why would they use you in commercial terms? And then believe in yourself from that point onwards, and believe in your ideas, but be realistic about it. It's not, I used to get sent, 10,000 word treatises on the life of Truffaut. And I'm a bit like, is this person read Empire magazine? You know what we do? Because they just want their words to be out there, but that's not quite how it works. It's about, a job.
All right. Well, that wraps things up. What are you working on next?
Well, just finished The Thing Expanded, literally 2 days ago.
Oh, wow. Congratulations.
So that's been a long journey as well. I like it a lot. The documentary we've made, slightly different feel, same structure, but different feel because the film's different. So the thing expanded. So I've got a couple of book proposals I'm working on. So I keep my book writing alongside documentary writing.
When do we expect the thing expanded to come out? Do we have a timeline?
It is out. It is just because our process is we have backers, and they are the first people to get it. So they all invest at certain points. These things. So they're getting it right now. And from about May 7th, I think we will have another digital sale of it. So May 7th.
Okay. So you literally finish it and then distribute it immediately.
Yeah, we do a couple of days of checks. You're always terrified of glitches and, sync and all sorts of boring things that you're going to get right.
Well, quality control,
yeah. And then, so that goes out to the back.
That's a really cool method. I really admire that because people, if you have it, why wait 6 months
absolutely. The physical bit will come in June, so it takes a while to make the DVDs, but we give it the film as a digital because you can just give it to you straight away. It's once it's done, you load it up onto a server and away you go.
I'm waiting for my Aliens Expanded to arrive in June, so
cool. I mean, if you fancy Thing Expanded as well, it's it's fun. We've got Kurt Russell, we've got John Carpenter, we've got all the guys, all the living guys, obviously. So it's been fun.
Okay. And where can people follow you on social medias?
So I'm Ian Nathan Writer on Instagram. I'm at Ian Nathan 2 on x.com. I'm not a very good social media guy, so forgive me. I did try hard a few years ago, but work sort of overtakes you, and I really need to up my game again. But it's hard to all these wheels spinning,
Sure.
And plus, I'm a man of a certain age, and there's times I just want to sit on the sofa and watch a movie, and not be doing anything else.
All right. Again, I appreciate your time. I appreciate everyone for listening. Go check out Aliens Expanded. Go check out The Thing Expanded, and everything else, all the wonderful things that Ian Nathan does. I'd really appreciate if everyone would give Dads from the Crypt a rating and review on iTunes, a rating on Spotify, a like and subscribe on YouTube, and follow us at Dads from the Crypt Talk on TikTok. With that, I thank you for listening to Dads from the Crypt.
Follow Dads from the Crypt on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, or I will follow you to the grave. No, seriously, you really should watch. But be careful what you ask for. You may get it.